Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and fellow maritime enthusiasts, welcome to this timely panel discussion on sea power and global politics. Who rules the shipping routes? I'm Yanni, Moutsios, journalist. I write about geopolitics, and this is really an honor to be here today with all these distinguished guests, because we will be talking about issues that are really up to date and can actually play a critical role in the maritime industry. So in our hyper-connected world, the oceans are more than vast expanses of blue. They are the lifeblood of global trade, carrying over 90% of the world's goods by volume. So from the bustling ports of PIRAEUS to the strategic choke points of the Suez and Malacca Straits, control over these routes isn't merely an economic imperative. It's actually a geographical and geopolitical chessboard where superpowers maneuver, alliances form, and vulnerabilities expose the fragility of our shared prosperity. I would now like to present our guests. I would like to start with His Excellency Matthew Lodge, the Ambassador of the British Embassy in Athens. Ambassador, thank you very much for being with us. Professor Athanasios Platias, on the other side of the panel, Strategy Chair, University of PIRAEUS, as well as Dr. Elena Lazarou, Director General of ELIAMEP. Thank you very much for being here with us. Unfortunately, we do not have with us Ms. Maria Berceletu, Senior Market Analyst at the Signal Group, who will actually send us a video cast with her presentation. And Dr. Sotiris Sermpos, who had to be with the Prime Minister in Komotini, so he will not be with us either. So, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to the Ambassador for his initial statement, and then we can start our conversation. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Yanni, and thank you very much to Danai and all the Navigator team for the chance to join today's panel. As we've heard from other speakers, the focus on international shipping in a world that has become and may well become even more unstable and unpredictable over the months and years to come is something which rightly preoccupies, I know, all of you in the industry, but is increasingly an area of focus and attention for politicians, for policymakers, and for diplomats. And if I just pluck three issues which I know are topical today, the challenge of decarbonisation that we've already heard about, and the events in the International Maritime Organization just 2 weeks ago, and what that means for the industry and the part it plays in tackling the climate emergency and the global response to the green transition. Point one. Point two, the proliferation of geopolitical tensions and conflicts that we have seen most recently since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but of course subsequently with conflict in Gaza and the spillover of that and impacts on the Red Sea and more broadly. And thirdly, government responses to those issues, short of moving to wide-scale state-on-state conflict. And of course, I'm referring there both to the introduction and the increasing use of economic sanctions that have been targeting the shipping industry, specifically in the case of Russian oil and gas exports. So those three examples, and there are others, have all brought international shipping into the spotlight for policymakers and generalists like myself. And I think they've also highlighted something else, which is that, as Yanni has said, and we've heard from that brief video clip beforehand, with somewhere between 80 and 90% of global trade by volume shipped by sea, 70% by value, with an early consequence and realization of Russia's invasion of Ukraine being a renewed focus on energy security, and with the parallel realization that you do not get energy security on an international basis if your shipping industry is not playing a part in transporting that energy. And even nearer to home, for the citizens and voters in our Western democracies, issues around food security. Less in the spotlight, perhaps over the last couple of years, but if we remember, Ukrainian grain exports to Africa and elsewhere were a major focus in the early stage of the conflict. So I would argue that whichever way we look, the global shipping industry's perhaps comfortable and historical position of getting on, plying its trade, having regulation where you need it but no more, and just servicing the world economy is becoming increasingly untenable, and we are seeing emerging interdependencies between shipping, between regulators, between policymakers, and indeed a reliance on state actors for security of those shipping lanes and maintaining freedom of navigation.
So, Ambassador, I would like to take it down to your personal perspective, I mean from the UK perspective. And I would like to ask you, how deeply does the UK and indeed the global economy rely on uninterrupted routes, shipping routes that is, and what lessons from history, such as the Suez crisis, inform today's strategies? Can you elaborate on that?
I mean, the short answer is we rely extensively on shipping, but the important secondary point to that is that I don't think that is and has been fully understood and appreciated by politicians and governments, certainly across the West. We heard from the Chinese ambassador a few minutes ago a very eloquent and persuasive argument about Chinese engagement in global shipping. I think if you look here in Europe and in Western democracies, we have probably been guilty of taking global shipping and its contribution for granted. And it is only when you look back to the Suez crisis, but let's go back to a more recent event in Suez before the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. You only need to look at what happened with the Ever Given, or look at what happened in Baltimore, and you suddenly start to realize that just-in-time economies, Western consumers, who are voters who support our governments, have developed a set of expectations that, yes, we can maintain, and the industry is absolutely central in our ability to do that, but we can't maintain it if we do not have freedom of navigation, if we're trying to tackle growing conflict and geopolitical instability, and if the industry does not understand or is not able to predict with any certainty the regulatory and political environment in which it's operating. So I think we are enormously dependent, and I think we are waking up to that again, and we need to do it quickly.
May I just ask the attendees to show some respect to the guests here, because all those people that are actually right outside of this room, there's too much buzz. I don't know if you can actually hear what we're saying, because this area is quite small. So may I please, all of you, those especially that are having a coffee, to just keep it quiet if possible. I think it's a sign of respect to all of our guests. So, having said that, Ambassador, as we mark over 3 years since the onset of the war in Ukraine, what enduring impacts on shipping patterns and freight costs has the UK observed, and how has this reshaped trade alliances in Europe?
I think from my perspective, and it is just one perspective, we've talked about disruption to routes, rerouting around Southern Africa, pressure on costs, which inevitably are passed on to consumers. I've alluded to the concerns in maintaining secure alternative energy supplies, and also the challenges of food security. I think the bigger challenge, and I say this with all humility as a ambassador of a European country, a medium-sized European country, with global interests and global reach, but witnessing a global environment, a geopolitical environment that is becoming increasingly that of two, if not three, two major centers of political economic and, I hope not, but ultimately military weight, namely the United States and China. And I think for all of us in economies in Western society like the United Kingdom, we have been benefiting from a steady move towards global regulation, towards witnessing our shipping industry being able to compete in a broadly stable environment where the industry knows what the rules are, it can manage with a degree of confidence and predictability. And that has enabled us to refine both how the industry is operating. We were hearing from on ESG and the decarbonisation challenge. And all of that now, I think, is potentially up in the air. Because what we're seeing through new politics around the council table in the International Maritime Organization, what we're seeing with the increasing paralysis in the United Nations Security Council, what we're seeing in the increasingly strident rhetoric of some of our major world leaders, is an environment where the rules-based system on which we have all benefited and been able to profit and grow feels precarious. And I'm sure we'll hear from others who are more expert about some of the sort of science and latest thinking about that. But I would argue, therefore, against that backdrop, there is a choice that faces both the shipping industry and policymakers. Policymakers can say, well, the shipping industry, it's always survived, it's inevitably very flexible, there's lots of money in there, it will adapt. And the shipping industry could respond similarly and say, we don't like too much regulation, we're going to seize this opportunity here. But I think that route is perilous. Because actually our economies, as we've said, rely on our shipping routes and the capacity and the expertise of our seafarers. And if we, as anything other than the largest economies in the world, either cede the advantage that is already there, and I'm talking explicitly to a Greek audience here, where whatever you may say about Greece's scale as a European democracy or whatever, your country, your industry is still a leading force in global shipping. I don't want that advantage to be seized, to be ceded or passed to anybody else. But therefore we need to be increasingly agile and responsive to the uncertainties that we're facing. And surprise, as a diplomat, I would argue that industry and government and regulators need to be talking more to one another and working more closely together, because I don't think we can address any of these challenges in isolation.
So I think that the key is the interconnection, as you have placed it here. Following these introductory remarks from the ambassador, I would like now to give the floor to Professor Athanasios Platias, who holds the chair of strategy at the University of PIRAEUS. Professor will actually give us the overview of what we are about to face, or what we are already facing when it comes to challenges, risks, shipping, and the future ahead. So, Professor, would you like to start with the presentation? Yes, you can take the floor. Just a few words on Professor Platias. He is a distinguished scholar in international relations and strategic studies, and has authored influential works on grand strategy, deterrence, and the classics of strategic thought, including Thucydides, enduring lessons on power politics. Professor, thank you.
Kalispera. What I will try to do today is to give an overall explanation of what's going on in geopolitics and geoeconomics. My basic argument is that we are in the center of a second Cold War. And unlike the first Cold War, the competition takes place in the sea. And unlike the first Cold War, the economies are interconnected due to globalization. And the sea trade, the bottom of the sea with cables, it's really the epiphenomenon of connectivity. So the competition that takes place it's weaponizing this interdependence, this connectivity. Therefore, the sea trade, and also underwater cables are at the center of this geopolitical competition. So, new Cold War. The new Cold War takes place between the oceanic world, led by the United States, and the Eurasian world, like the first Cold War. But unlike what is similar is that the competition takes place at the technological level, military level, economic level, ideological, but there are two great differences. Now the emphasis is in the sea. In the first Cold War, it was static. It was in East Europe. Now it's in the sea. And the second, the economies are interconnected. So the sea, because it connects the world and 80% of the trade happens to the sea, it's a perfect place to weaponize interdependence. And we can start with the weaponization of choke points. Usually the dominant power that could control the sea, thalassocracy, will control the world. The ancient formula was found here in Greece. If you control the sea, you control the wealth. If you control the wealth, you control the world. That's what the British did in their empire. Now, this has been turned around. The enemies of the thalassocratic and oceanic powers try to deny their access, and the choke points are perfect for that. So all choke points are facing different kinds of threats, from great power competition to regional threats to piracy. If you see where Eurasia meets the oceanic powers, it's where all flashpoints or potential flashpoints are taking place. Baltic Sea. Between Baltic Sea and the Black Sea, we have the war in Ukraine. In Baltic Sea, we see continuous conflict, destruction of connectivity at the energy level, Nord Stream 2, destruction of the cables that are in the bottom of the sea. Black Sea, attacks on ports, attacks on ships. Then we continue, Eastern Mediterranean, the exit of Suez, and also a lot of local disputes with all regional powers. Then Red Sea, 12% of the global trade. 60% of it was disrupted due to Houthis supported by Iran. Then let's continue around Eurasia. The Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, very central. 30% of the energy trade. It's under threat of disruption, but also frequent seizures of tankers. And by the way, this area was the most important in the 80s due to the tanker world. The older of you may remember it. Then we continue in South China Sea, Strait of Malacca, very central. It controls about 5 trillion trade, something like 35% of the global trade. There, we have all kinds of problems. Jurisdictional disputes. China's trying to control the Naidas line. The United States trying to maintain the freedom of the sea. This is the most dangerous place on Earth, because if we have a conflict there, it can easily escalate to World War III. Then East China Sea with Taiwan. Taiwan is blocking the exit of China in the Pacific. So it's very central for the United States to control Taiwan and control all the choke points around Taiwan that blocks the Chinese entry to the Pacific Ocean. The Chinese are determined to reunite, and we see all kinds of problems, from blockades to using of maritime militia. very dangerous place. And to continue the trip around Eurasia, the Arctic. The Arctic, with the melting of the ice, it has the potential to shorten the trade routes by 40%. Therefore, it's another potential area of competition. And the exit of the Arctic to the Atlantic is where Greenland is located. Therefore, you can understand why Greenland is important for the American grand strategy. So my argument is, all the seas around Eurasia are either in conflict or in potential conflict. That's the first element, and we see very interesting things. The ships, for first time, have become targets. Usually they were targets of pirates, only for economic reason. Now you see states using state capability, including the latest technology, in order to attack ships and ports. So that's a new thing. Now let me shift from geopolitics to geoeconomics. As Rubio, the US Secretary of State, said recently, globalization and interdependence and the rule-based order that the ambassador referred has worked against the West. Therefore, it needs to be fractured. And the way to fracture it is to disengage the economies. The strategy of the West is decoupling. Decoupling means essentially undermining globalization and all this interdependence that was established during this 30-year period of globalization. And all trade connectivity, it's weaponized. Everything that connects energy, you saw the war in Ukraine. It made a complete rebalancing of the energy landscape. You have been in the shipping business, you saw how the trade patterns changed there. And with the weaponization of energy, let me give you one example. 3 of the major energy producers are under sanctions: Russia, Iran, Venezuela. Now, if you sanction major producers, you have side effects, like the shadow fleet, which is probably 20% of the tanker fleet, more than 1,500 fleets, which are target to secondary sanctions. The weaponization doesn't only involve trade. It needs to rearrange trade patterns. And the name of the game under decoupling is to bring productive capacity back to the West, mostly in the United States, reshoring, or productive capacity in its allies, friendshoring or nearshoring, like Mexico. This again changes the global patterns of trade. For example, with the US tariffs on China, started in the Liberation Day, Chinese-American trade went more than 70% down. What China did, it started selling to Europe and to the global south. So again, a huge disruption of trade. Secondary sanctions in places like India. So rebalancing of trade, weaponization of everything, I said, weaponization of ports. Look at the geopolitics of Panama ports. 2 of the ports there are owned by a Chinese company. Trump is threatening to occupy Canada unless the Chinese leave. The Hong Kong company that controls the 2 ships tried to sell it to some Western companies, including an American one, but the Chinese are blocking it because they want Costco to operate. So ports are in the center of geopolitical competition. So everything that connects shipping, ports, shipbuilding has become central in the geopolitical competition. You see, to control the sea, you must have an ecosystem to support it, which means shipbuilding. The United States from the 80s, from the Reagan administration, decided to let shipbuilding in the world markets. And the shipping moved essentially in 3 countries, China, Korea, and Japan, all of them concentrated in the East. China controls more than 60% of the new builds. The United States, 0.2. There is no way to compete, and there is no way from the primacy thalassocratic power to maintain its dominance without shipbuilding. Therefore, something had to be done. One way to do it was the port fees. So the United States came with huge port fees that made it very expensive for Chinese vessels to visit American ports. The idea behind that was to use all these revenues in order to reignite the American shipping. Of course, the Chinese reacted. When the Chinese president and the American president met in South Korea, the United States faced with a threat. If you continue raising tariffs and port fees, I will not sell you rare earths. So, you see, suddenly, shipbuilding becomes very central to geopolitics.
Professor, I think we can...
And to conclude with that, what I try to say with all these examples is that all connections are weaponized, from shipbuilding to ports, to ships, to trade, to choke points. So my prediction is that this will continue.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think that has been quite an extensive list of challenges that we need to face as a shipping industry. One of the major topics, though, is security in shipping, which brings us now to Ms. Elena Lazarou, Director General of ELIAMEP, for her to actually discuss the importance of security in shipping. And then we can have a round of questions to discuss more of those topics that have been also already mentioned. Ms. Lazarou?
Thank you very much, and thank you to the forum for inviting me, and thank you for the enlightening presentations. As always, coming in last, a lot of what I wanted to say has already been said, because in fact security has been discussed. But maybe let me add a bit to the conversation by bringing in a bit the European level, which I think is extremely important when we talk about the regulation, but also the way in which the various actors involved in maritime security will cooperate in the European space currently, but also in the years to come. And I say this because I think, at least in my lifetime, there have been very few moments when security has been such an issue for the private sector as well, shipping and others, where industry has been a fundamental component of the stakeholders that are involved in security, and where the discussion between policymakers and those actors in the private sector, in shipping and elsewhere, are so strongly focused on geopolitics. It's interesting that when you meet stakeholders, as I do, I say these days that anyone in the shipping industry, in the defense industry, in the space industrial industry is more of a geopolitical analyst than any of us, because there is such close monitoring. You will know that places like Eurasia and Brzezinski and Rasmussen and others are booming, because everyone needs to know what security threats there are in their industry. So moving to my sort of small typology of what others already have said, where do I think the fundamental sources of insecurity in the maritime business, but also in the maritime global public good security come from? Because let's remember that navigation and the freedom of navigation is essential for the business that everyone here is in, but it is also essentially a public good that is provided for by policymakers. So my typology, but it's already been said, I'm not going to say anything on top of everything that's already been mentioned. I see 4 areas from which we are now looking at the maritime international security environment. One has been already alluded to. We are facing a time of shifting geopolitics. That's a very big cliche. But it has to do with two aspects, essentially. Great power competition, and here the United States and China and Russia have been mentioned. I also sometimes like to add to great powers those that are foreseen to become great powers, whether it be for demographic or other reasons. I think India is a very interesting place to watch. Sometimes we can even say that, and I know this sounds controversial, but I look at Africa as well, because demographically it will boom. And by booming demographically, it will have a great impact on everything that is happening. And we can get to places like Somalia and Djibouti and how they impact piracy and other aspects of maritime. But it's important to think, we are having the shift in global geopolitics of power. We have very little alignment between the major poles of power, which means that we have rivalries, discrepancies, weaponizations of everything has been mentioned. And at the same time, we are having a definite weakening of multilateral structures, which means we have very few rules that we can guarantee will be abided by, whether that be in freedom of navigation or it be in space exploration or defense, which is an area I work in. So that's one side of the insecurity. The second side of insecurity is in most areas of security, we have no clue anymore who the actors are that are actually the villains or the non-villains. You know, we used to know it was states. It was very easy to look at the world in who is good, who is bad, depending when you were looking from. Now we have non-state actors. We have, you know, the Houthis is a more cliché example to mention in this context. But Hamas, I was thinking, yes, maritime space. But not just, you know, we have trafficking groups, we have criminal groups, we have, you know, cartels that do drug trafficking. There is a wide array of non-state actors that weaponize assets, capabilities, and relationships to create insecurity in the maritime space. Thirdly, we have hybrid and cyber threats, and this is a domain that enables those actors to act, creating insecurity in space, in land, in maritime and air. Why? Because, you know, it used to be that those capabilities that we consider hostile used to be weapon systems that only states could procure. Now it's drones, anyone can procure them. And then we also have in this hybrid space the attacks on undersea infrastructure, attacks on satellite-based intelligence sharing infrastructure. All of this affects our security. And finally, and it's been mentioned, I think the environmental and climate challenge, which for a long time we overlooked if we were in the security domain proper, but now we see how it's created antagonisms that are hugely conflictual in rare earths, also for undersea mining aspects, but also contestation for maritime spaces and the impact of the melting of the ices on the maritime, you know, the sea levels. These are all things. You want to interrupt me, sorry. I've gone on for too long.
I just need to elaborate slightly, because you actually come from an institution like ELIAMEP. And the question is, could institutions such as ELIAMEP help the maritime industry in planning scenarios on how to deter these kind of challenges and threats? So to put it into action, this is where you normally come in, don't you?
Well, we are a think tank, we think. I think we give others ideas to put them into action, but since I've advertised all our competition in the form of all the major geopolitical consultancies, let me just say a couple of things. And also to say I'm very new at this job. I just started on September 1st, so there is much more in my institution that I don't know so much about yet. I think one key area of focus when we look at these threats is preparedness and foresight. And preparedness and foresight mean that to generate thinking about actions that can preempt threats. So one thing that we do in think tanks, and this is ELIAMEP, but also with our global partners and various partnerships we're building, is to try and look at the security environment in the way it is now, but also the way it will potentially evolve in scenario from now to 2030, from now to 2035. When you generate these scenarios, this is what foresight does, then you can generate courses of action that can enable the prevention of the maximization of security threats. And I think when it comes to industry, it's very important to share this information with industry, because we have to acknowledge we live in a world of limited resources. So when industry buys into these ideas, and I think it's important to have this prevention of threats that could cost enormously and could cost insurance and reinsurance and other premiums, to say, you know, if we look at, you know, that X area of the Mediterranean or the Baltic or the Arctic. This is what could happen. And in ways to prevent it, we should either, A, have a huge amount of intelligence and information sharing where industry is very important. In the European Union, by the way, most of the regulation about sharing information and intelligence on maritime situational threats comes also through cooperating with industry. So get that information, anticipate what kind of diplomacy you need to have in order to prevent or preempt that kind of situation or scenario. And thirdly, what kind of policies? Because diplomacy is how to work with others to prevent it, but policy is how to work on adaptation or mitigation of climate change, on ensuring a security of supply of certain materials, on ensuring that you have others guarding certain choke points in maritime security, in ensuring that trade is happening in a way that is diversified so as not to have coercive practices. And also to look forward, what other opportunities are there? We've never mentioned Latin America on this panel, but Chile aims to be the biggest producer of green hydrogen by 2030, 2035. There's been agreements in place to create green hydrogen shipping corridors from Latin America to the EU. These are kind of things that you think about in a think tank and you say there is an opportunity, and that's the Southern Atlantic space. That's a space to look out for security.
Okay, I would like to thank you very much for these first remarks, and then I would like to pass on the floor to Maria Beccelletti, who is not present here right now. She's a senior market analyst at the Signal Group, but she has sent us a video with her presentation, so I would just like to invite you to watch it, and then we're going to have another round of questions with the esteemed guests, and then we will conclude this panel. So can we just play the video? Thank you.
We are entering a new phase of geopolitical realignment, one that's reshaping global maritime trade. China has reopened talks to buy US wheat, its first real step in over a year, signaling cautious progress toward a limited trade thaw. Both sides have also agreed to suspend port restrictions for 12 months. These moves do not end the rivalry, but they do show a practical effort to ease tensions and keep trade routes open. Meanwhile, deeper shifts are unfolding in the oil market. The latest round of US secondary sanctions on Russian crude is forcing major buyers, especially India and China, to reconsider how exposed they are to sanctioned vessels and trade routes. Several Chinese state-owned refiners have already paused their seaborne liftings of Russian oil due to rising compliance and insurance risks. At the same time, the US, UK, and EU are tightening oversight of the so-called shadow fleet, tankers operating outside conventional transparency and insurance systems. That means more legal scrutiny, closer tracking, and potential disruption for anyone trading on those gray zones. Across key trading basins, we are seeing geopolitical flashpoints reshape freight dynamics. In the Black Sea, Ukraine's grain corridor remains fragile, with ongoing infrastructure damage and high insurance costs pushing many buyers toward the US Gulf and Brazil. In the Middle East and Red Sea, the Gaza conflict and Houthi attacks are forcing tankers and container ships to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope, driving up ton-mile exposure and tightening vessel availability. Overall, freight, insurance, and asset values are now shaped more by the geography of risk than by traditional demand cycles. Looking ahead, those who can anticipate choke points and adapt the routing and compliance strategies will be best placed to capture emerging opportunities.
That was a brief presentation from Ms. Maria Beccelletti, who, as I said, she was not able to be here with us. So I would just like to start with the conversation now, starting with Professor Platias. Professor Platias, you have given us an overview of the challenges, including choke points, flashpoints, the interconnection which may be weaponized, as well as the shipbuilding throughout the world. So this is an ever-changing world. We're actually facing turbulent times. My question is, how can the shipping industry deal with all of it either separately or as a whole, given the fact that policymakers do not necessarily take in mind what the ship owners have to deal with and the costs that are actually aligned with that as well?
Well, can you hear me? Yeah. In my presentation, I overemphasized threats and risk. I did not have the time to get to the opportunities because the geopolitical and geoeconomic disruption essentially create market inefficiencies. So when you have a market inefficiency, it's the industry, your industry, that is capitalizing. So actually what I described, it's threats for supply chains, but it's essentially opportunity for you to be able to understand the patterns, to understand the logic, and take advantage of it. So let me give an example. The changing patterns of energy trade, shifting, for example, from the traditional pipelines between Russia and Europe, either through Ukraine or through the Baltic, created opportunity for your LNG industry. So all these geopolitical things that I mentioned, they come with opportunity. So our job is to describe the threats and the risk, and your job is to see how you can translate this risk into opportunity for your industry. It's as simple as that. That's why you have to invest in geopolitical and geoeconomic understanding, either within your firms or you using consultants in order to be able to predict the trends and capitalize with it. In other words, for you, it's a huge opportunity.
Professor Platias, thank you. The same question applies to you, Dr. Lazarou, and it's about the foresight that, as Professor Platias said, that our kind guests here, the ship owners and the companies, can actually use in order to predict and deter those threats.
Yes, thanks for that. I think I referred to it in my initial remarks. I want to take us back a bit because the current environment makes us talk a lot about armed conflict because of the situation in Ukraine, the situation in the Middle East, the situation in Sudan, the situation as it is in several parts of the world. But I think the first moment of realization of the lack of foresight and how we should have had it was COVID. I think the pandemic was the first instance of realization of the immense economic and other effects that, you know, a blockage of globalization, of connectivity, of transport could have. And if one looks at what happened then and the cost that had for a number of industries, the cost that had for a number of insurance agencies, when you look at what could have done with foresight, had we anticipated a global pandemic, had we anticipated what it would mean for supply chains, had we anticipated what kind of regulatory measures we could have taken as Europe, as the United States, as Greece, as anyone, to prevent the economic impact of that, that would have been foresight that would have been very well placed because we are still living under the effects of that. And Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and on top of that, the several security threats that we've seen as a result of various proxy phenomena of that, we should not forget they have come on the back of the impact of COVID, right? That's where we lacked foresight. Now we are talking very late about things that we should have done, but we should not prevent ourselves from thinking that this happened and something similar may not happen again. In foresight, what you should look for is something that's called the black swans. It's the events you don't anticipate and will have a major impact. And many times, you know, one thinks, why should I invest in something that is so unlikely? Well, it's because this unlikely event could be like COVID. And it could mean that your ships are stuck, your sailors are stuck in China. You don't know what to do with the economic impact of that. Or it could be Russia's war on Ukraine, where the financial system is blocked and no one can pay their people because of the way, you know, that worked. So I think, you know, this is the usage of foresight, and we should now be thinking of what would happen in 2030, 2035, and this could go anywhere for a climate-related impact to, it's been mentioned, a potential conflict in the South China Sea, or anything beyond that that is beyond our imagination.
Thank you, Dr. Lazarou. Ambassador, coming to you, you have served in many different countries and many different places of the earth. So, and coming from a country which has a long shipping tradition, I would like to ask for your view on what lies ahead and how these threats can either be deterred, can be overcome, or even see any challenges and opportunities stemming from it.
That's the easy question, is it, Yanni? Thank you. I mean, I think I don't have a crystal ball any more than anywhere else in the room, but I think as the Professor and Dr. Lazarou have very clearly brought out, we are in a period of growing uncertainty and instability. We have already learnt the lesson, and I entirely echo the point about the pandemic, of not having been sufficiently prepared before. I would go so far as to say we have probably been too comfortable. That has led us as European powers to become complacent about both the risks and the opportunities facing us. And I do not think, and I hear this sometimes, that people look at the prospect of a ceasefire in Ukraine and they imagine, or maybe they hope, that we're going to see somehow a reversion to the world before February 2022. I'm afraid that is an illusion. The world is not going in that direction. It is going to be more contested, more challenging. So we need to learn the lessons of what we haven't done in the past in terms of proper preparation and foresight. We need to be, I think, more courageous and collaborative in recognizing the risks that are there. And we need to inject a sense of urgency in our dialogue, in the way industry and government and the security agencies and our armed forces are interacting, so that because we cannot predict in detail where exactly the next challenge or disruption will come from. But what we can say, I think, sadly with a degree of confidence, is that it will come, and it may come sooner rather than later. So even if we can prepare ourselves through our dialogue, through our interaction, through a focus on our ability to respond, but underlying all of this, I think, on investing in our resilience. And this is where this industry has a fundamental and indispensable role to play, because we know that our global economy, even if it starts to fragment, the success and prosperity of our societies, our security, our ability to feed our populations, to power our industry and our homes, relies on shipping. And so I think we need to be focusing with a sense of determination and urgency on working together to strengthen that resilience in anticipation of whatever the next challenge will be.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank you very much, each of every one of you, as well as Ms. Maria Bertselet, who was not here today. Professor Platias, Dr. Lazarou, Ambassador, thank you very much.
Can I have just a short word?
A very brief comment, please. Thank you.
I agree with Ms. Lazarou that we have to look at the extreme events. But, you know, the writing is in the wall. The basic trends are here. Geopolitical competition is going to continue. We are not going to have superpower war because with nuclear weapons we'll destroy each other. Therefore, they will compete with all connectivity. So, the framework that I presented, it will continue. And this will cover the 90% of the trends that you will unfold in front of us. So for the industry, resilience is the number one, but also adaptability, because all these changes that I presented needs agility and adaptability in order to capitalize. And of course, it's good to look at the 5% or 2% of possibilities, but the 90% is in front of us. Look at it and take advantage of it.
Professor, I think we need to have a whole conference on this topic. So I would like to thank you very much. All of you have been a really great audience. Thank you very much to Danai for organizing this. It has been a pleasure. Thank you all.